So thanks very much, and thank you very much to Reed Learning for inviting me here today to talk to you. What I'm going to try and cover today, first of all, I want to look about the social web and how it is impacting the way we learn. Because, as I'll explain, my research shows it actually is having quite a considerable impact on what learning means nowadays and how we understand learning to take place. Then I want to look something at the enterprise social networking phenomenon that's happening in organizations and what that means for learning and development. And then finally, some of the ways we can support workplace learning in new ways perhaps that match more the ways we're doing things on the social web. So kind of different ways from the ways we've been doing them up to now. So let's get started then. How the social web is impacting the way we learn. Well, for those of you who know me, know that over the last 7 years, I've been running an annual survey on learning tools. And I've asked people, learning professionals from all around the world, both in academia and in the workplace learning training, to give me their top 10 tools for learning. And then from those top 10 tools, I created an annual top 100 tools list. So I've been doing that since 2007 now. And actually, and then I create a presentation at the end, and I've now got part of the website totally devoted to the top 100 tools thing because it's become very popular. I put the presentation on SlideShare so that anyone can access it. And for instance, the 2011 presentation has now been viewed over nearly 1 million times. And the 2012, nearly 600,000 times. And what's interesting also that KPCB, always get this wrong, they're a big venture capitalist company, I just call them KPCB. They have taken it and put it in part of their Internet Trends presentation, which has been seen by 2.5 million people. And they obviously recognize that this is some evidence of the way learning is changing themselves, and they are kind of advisors in the venture capitalist market. So I think it's become quite an important piece of work. It started off as just a little thing I started with a few people, let's get some top 100 tools, and now it's become a very popular resource. So the 2013 one I released 2 weeks ago, 30th of September, and it's also already had about over 75,000 views, I think. So I haven't got time to go through all these tools with you, and if you want to see it, go to the website, you'll find it all there, all the list, and all the links to all the tools, with all their rankings and their cost and availability, and some of the comments people have made about the way they're using them for learning. And when I say learning tool, I mean one that's used for their own personal and professional learning, as well as one for teaching or training. So I've kept that very broad definition of a learning tool. So like I say, I can't show you all 100, we'll be here all day, but I'm going to show you the top 10, okay? And take a look at them. And as you look at them, think about, do I use this tool on a daily basis? I could say a regular basis, so daily, 3 or 4 times a week, something like that. Think about it. Count them up as we go through them, okay? So at 10, okay, so there's 90 below here, but at 10 was Google Plus, Hangouts. Now, I don't know how many of you use Google Plus. Google Plus is a social network site, Google's social networking site. But Google Hangouts is their web conferencing ability. Easily, people can get together, set up a web conference. 10 people, you can have a private conference. More than that, you can actually start broadcasting more publicly. And Google Plus kind of has just come into the top 10 list this year. It was been in lower ranking, so it jumped up 7 places this year. So what I tried to do is see trends up and down and so forth. And at number 9 was Facebook. Facebook came in. It retained its place from last year. It's always been a popular tool for learning. And at number 8 is WordPress. Sorry, I'm in the way there. And number 8 is WordPress, which is a tool that you can use for blogging or creating websites. And that's actually dropped down a little bit this year. And Number 7 was Dropbox, which is a file storage service which enabled people to share files very easily. Has become a godsend for people in education who want to share files, as well as other people who just want to be able to synchronize their own files across their computers, but also share them with others. And number 6, up quite a few places, was Evernote, which is a personal productivity tool and allows you to take notes and just generally keep track of your to-dos lists and all kinds of things like that. It also has a new business version which allows you to share it with your colleagues as well, so you can actually compare and working on projects and tasks and so forth. In at up 3 places, number 5 is PowerPoint. Now, PowerPoint's always been a well-regarded tool, hasn't it? But it's become back to its 2007 position. It dropped down a bit, but people realize that PowerPoint is quite an important tool for learning. At 4, we get Google Search, and that's pretty much retained its place. Google Search, I put Google Search rather than just Google, because Google's so many products now. Google Search, most people consider it to be the one e-learning tool that you need. Just go out there and Google it, and that's it. Number 3, and it's dropped back 2 places now, one place this year, is YouTube. The site, video sharing site, you don't need me to tell you what that is. And then up 1 place from last year, in number 2, is Google Drive or Google Docs. So the collaboration tools, office collaboration tools and file storage area and synchronization tool and so forth. And that, as I say, has gone up a place, taking YouTube's place, number 2. And then at number 1 is Twitter. And Twitter has been number 1 for the last 5 years now. And when I collate the results, it's miles out in front. Now, Twitter is, for many people, quite an important tool. And in a minute, I'm going to show you how people are using these tools. But it's amazing how it's retained its number one position. But you look on there and you say, well, there's no real learning tools, are there? There's no real dedicated learning tools, perhaps PowerPoint. And I think this is the beauty of it all, that these tools, these are general purpose tools, are being used for learning, being used for working, for pleasure. So we're now seeing very much a blend of how we're using these tools. It's almost indistinguishable about whether we're using them for our leisure or for working or for learning. And that's really is represented the whole of the list. Online social tools pretty much predominate the list. Down the list, there are some e-learning authoring tools, and there's Moodle, course management system, but they don't dominate the list. They obviously have a good showing in the list, but essentially it's these free online social tools that really are quite, really have been strong for the whole time I've done this list, and increasingly so over the years. So as you're going through, then count up how many of these you use on a daily or pretty much daily basis, a couple of days, okay? Right, now this is where we go into the next bit of interaction now. So what I want you to do is we're going to use another polling tool now for you to tell me how many of these you use on a daily basis. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So if you've got a phone, you'll be able to send a text message. If you've got Twitter, you can use Twitter, whatever you prefer. So let me just get that up and running now. Okay, so what I'm going to use is a tool called Poll Everywhere. And the way that Poll Everywhere works is that you think about the number. So if you don't use any, that's the code you need to remember. So then you either text just the code, like 526457, to that number if you're using the mobile phone. If you're using Twitter, you can just send a tweet to @poll, and then the code. You don't need to worry about the hashtag or anything. This will keep it quite private. Nobody will know what you've said, because it's very unlikely that anybody is following @poll. And as you know with Twitter, if nobody's following that person, your tweet won't actually be seen pretty much by most people. It'll be in your public timeline, but it won't be seen. So here we go. Oh, it's coming in already. Standing in the way again, sorry. Just wait for a few more, see if any more come in. I'll tell you what my score is, but mine would probably fall about here, 7 or 8. So anybody who's in 10 probably be unlikely. So it's nice that there's nobody that says 0, which is good. We got pretty much a good span there, I think, 3 or 4. And the reason I'm asking you to think like this is because I think unless you are using these social tools, you don't really understand what impact they are having on people and how they're personally having an impact on you. They have changed the way I learn, way I behave. And for me, as I'll say later as well, that Twitter is, without Twitter, I probably couldn't be standing here talking to you because it's allowed me to keep up to date with my connections. It's my essential tool. It's probably the one I go to first of all when I wake up in the morning because that's where I find out what's happening overnight. So being social is, I think, being a prerequisite for helping your own organization to be social. Because you can't tell your organization to be social. You can't tell tell your learners or your employees to be social unless you know what it is to be social yourself. And then even then you can't tell them to be social. You can only help them to be social. I think that's a big difference that we're going to be seeing. It's not about telling people to do things anymore. It's about helping them, showing them what it is to do this stuff. So that's probably what I expected to see there. So in some ways, the first step, if you haven't been familiarized yourself with these tools, is to do that, to explore them, to understand what they offer. You haven't got to use them on a regular basis, for sure, unless you don't want to. And I don't use everything, but I know what it can do. I know what its capabilities are. Not necessarily, as I say, to use them internally, but just understand the concepts behind them and what they offer differently from what's been happening before. So let me go back to the presentation then. And I wanted to spend a bit of time just showing you what affects how people are using these tools. Because I bet you thought, Twitter, what's that got to do with the learning? I mean, how do you use that? But a lot of those tools, and you saw Twitter, Facebook, Google+, high up in that list there. And the reason people are doing that they're using these tools to build a trusted network of colleagues, friends, probably mainly outside their organizations. Often it's referred to as a personal learning network. And that personal learning network is actually becoming a very important place for people to find out about not what's happening and just happening in the industry and profession, but for all kinds of reasons. Let me just show you. These are some of the reasons people say why they use these tools. So you can ask and answer questions of one another. There are always questions on Facebook, on Twitter, people asking about how do you do this, how do you do the other. And if you have a big connections, or if you have a big network, or even a small network, you're probably going to get answers to your questions pretty quickly. It's a place to exchange ideas and resources and brainstorm. Just keep up to date with what's happening. And this, I think, learn from each other, often without realizing it. And for me, that is the serendipitous part of learning is really important, because sometimes I read that somewhere on Twitter, and that can be sometimes more powerful than the sort of formal instructional approaches to learning. So people who are do build the connections, do have these learning networks, who trust the people that they connect with. And it's not just connecting with anybody, it's making those decisions for yourself, who you connect with and who's going to bring you value. Now, I have something like 20,000 followers on Twitter, but I only connect with like 300, I think, something like that. Not because I don't think there's any value in those people. I can only cope with certain numbers. So it's not about just, following and people back. It's about trying to define a network that's going to work for you. So for those of you who are immersed in Facebook and Twitter and Google will know this instinctively, but for those of you who aren't, and really that's one of the key things to get started, to find out what these networks, building these networks can do for you individually as an individual. And people often say to me, Twitter, you can't train doctors to be on Twitter. Well, nobody's ever saying that, you train people to do their jobs entirely with Twitter. But what this piece of medical research shows that, well, something like 25% of doctors are used them. But I think this is it. It'll never replace it, but it's going to provide an additional and valuable channel that you can add to physicians' knowledge base. And when I say it's about helping you to learn the new, not learn the old necessarily. It can help you learn the old. Learn the new, but learn the new, I mean learn about the new ideas, concepts that are happening in the world. The world is changing so quickly with new ideas. And the only place you can really hear about them first is out on the net, out on the web, by just connecting and finding out. So for doctors, finding out about new, what's new in research, but for any of us, learning and development, as I say, I'm constantly finding out what people are doing, what's new, trends, what's working, what's not working. So for me, it's a source of very important information. So, as I said, individuals are using these tools to learn the new and keep up to date with the industry and professions with all kinds of devices, whether it's a laptop or their phones. Most of these tools are mobile enabled, so you don't have to be sitting at your desktop anymore. I check my tweets as I'm going along on the train and things like that. It's just so easy to do. So it's not something I have to sit down and make time for necessarily, although that may be the way you prefer to work. It can be something you can learn on the go, as one of the tweeters earlier said. So it's about keeping up to date. And I think for most knowledge workers, and I'm talking about knowledge workers here, learning the new, keeping up to date with what's happening in their profession is going to be important. It's not only important for themselves in terms of keeping up their own skills in order to perhaps get another job if they need to, but it's also important because they can then bring what they learn into the organization and share it there. And that is really essentially the most important thing for organizations. Many organizations unfortunately think social media is just trivial nonsense and ban it. You probably work in organizations, I don't know. But I think many are realizing now that what's going on outside can be brought in and shared internally, and that can actually add to the value of what's happening in the organization. Also, the people who choose these top 100 tools say that they use them to find solutions to their own performance problems. And by that, performance support system. The net is literally a performance support system. If they're sitting at their desk, can't remember how to do something on Excel or Word or something, where do they go? They probably don't go to the learning management system and find a course on Word, do they? Let's be honest about it. What they'll do is go online, Google it, go to YouTube, watch a video, learn how to do it, and get on with their job. So for many, these tools are just a way of finding things out very, very quickly and not having to take a test or a quiz to find out whether they know it or not. Just do it. Just learn how to do it. And not even necessarily remember it anymore, because all they need to remember is where they found it before or how they searched for it before. It's not actually having to remember how to do the task before. It's about just where they can get hold of the solution when they need it. And of course, the other important thing is that many people now are quite happy to share what they learn, what they find, they create with one another, which is why places like YouTube and others, file sharing sites, SlideShare, are such big resource bases because people willingly share what they learn. And it's not just individuals now. It's quite clear from the sort of contributions that teams and groups are using these tools for knowledge sharing and collaboration. So they're finding tools to work together as teams on collaborative projects. And in many cases, they're actually bypassing IT and, dare I say, learning development departments to do just that, because they can more quickly and more easily solve their problems themselves. So I think that's a sobering message for us all. And I think what I said earlier is that for some, certainly for me, learning on the social web means learning as one understands it is never going to be the same again. It's about continuous learning. First of all, learning is not about instruction for me anymore. It's about acquiring a stream of information, making sense of it myself, but it's on a continuous basis, drip feed, if you like, of stuff coming in on a daily basis, which builds up over time. Let's just tell you, if you just spent 10 minutes on the web every day, and you'd probably learn something there, just in 10 minutes. Over a week, that will probably be about an hour. Over a year, it'll be 50 hours. That's probably equivalent to about 6 or 7 training days a year. So, just almost organizations giving people 10 minutes, encouraging them to spend 10 minutes a day on something would actually improve, would be a really good way of helping them to do this, to keep up to date with what's going on. So it's continuous. It could be immediately. They can find things when they need it. It's certainly socially, even if they're not necessarily interacting with people, it's because people have shared things and they are made them available in a way that, in a connected way, shall we say, that like people can learn from one another. One of the key things is autonomy. People can go out and do things for themselves, and they can decide what they want to learn, when they want to do it, how they want to do it. They haven't got anybody tracking them and making sure they've completed it. If they just go in and find that few seconds that they need on that video, that's fine. They're not going to be told, well, you haven't completed that course. So autonomy is becoming quite an important thing. People are feeling that they're in charge and control of their own learning. And it's happening in the workflow. So sitting at your desk, you need to do a problem, solve a problem, you go out and solve it, come back to your job. A few seconds, a few minutes probably out of your workflow, but it's happening while you're at your desk. So these are the ways that learning is really changing. And I have to say, but people who are active on the social web, they're beginning to get a little bit frustrated with some of the ways we've been forcing them to do things before. I read all the time and I hear comments about, I got to do some e-learning. I hear it all the time. I go to shops. I went to a big chain and I heard this woman say, I've got to go and do my e-learning now. And somebody said, well, just go in and press this. Take in a book and press the next button and you get through it. I was standing there going, but I think it's happening around. And my colleague says that quite a lot of e-learning, he says, is knowledge dump started up with trivial interactions, which is a bit depressing, really. But even more depressing is I heard this, that people are actually paying their children to take their e-learning for them. Compliance courses where you have to spend 2 hours doing it, and you're not allowed to get through to the next screen until you spend, you've got to spend 30 seconds more on that screen. Oh, they said, I can't do it, so they're paying their children to do it. Something's gone wrong here, hasn't it? Now, we can't change, compliance and regulatory training issues overnight, although I think that there are sort of moves to recognize that that's not solving the problems. But I think what this means is that if we just try and shove social media or onto the sort of existing e-learning, it's not actually going to help very much. The last thing people want to be told is to be forced to use social media in a way that's not they feel comfortable about. And the people who are used to social media certainly don't want to be told to do it in the way that they're being told to do it, in a prescribed way. They use it, as we've seen, autonomously in the way that they want to solve their own problems and to get what they need. So it isn't really about, social learning isn't about adding social media to e-learning. Social learning is actually meaning that we need to rethink the whole ways we're doing workplace learning and ways we're supporting it. It's moving from more of a knowledge transfer approach to just supporting, enabling learning to take place. So that's what I wanted to talk to you a little bit more today. But it's important to see where I'm coming from on this, because, as I say, those of you who are familiar with the web will know how it's impacted your own lives. But for others, you need to understand where other people are coming from too, so that you can understand that it is almost a need to do that. And I talk about it almost like a revolution in learning, workplace learning revolution, because individuals do now have their actual tools to do things for themselves. And as I said, they often are bypassing learning development. I don't just say it, I've read it other places, I can see it, people told me and so forth. I don't need to go to learning development. I don't need to go and get a course. I can just go out and sort myself out. And so I think we need to think about how we can do that. And one of the ways that things are changing, and I think which are going to be a help to learning development to do that, is that organizations are now beginning to introduce what they're calling enterprise social networking tools. So the sort of things that, internal Facebook and things. So Yammer, for instance, is probably the most popular one. Actually, it appears number 20 on the top 100 tools list. So you can see that it's quite a powerful one. There's Socialcast. And in fact, Deloitte, let me get my facts right here. Deloitte predicts by the end of 2013, more than 90% of Fortune 500 companies will have partially or fully implemented an ESN. And now, a lot of these ones have been actually what's called voluntarily adopted. So particularly like Yammer, which anyone can sign up for a Yammer account. You don't have to have it sort of formally adopted by the organization. Anyone can sign up for a Yammer account, and a Yammer network is set up for the organization. If you have never used Yammer, you just go in and try and set up your email address, and you'll find that you probably just join a network that already exists. If you didn't know it did, it probably does. Some of the others have been more formally adopted, sort of top-down approach by organizations saying, yeah, we now recognize social and connective learning, working and learning is important, so we're going to adopt these new systems. But what is it about these systems that really are different from all the other platforms that we've had? Well, this is just a mock-up just to show you a few things, but the thing about this is they're not about stocks anymore. That database is full of content in a very static way. It's about a dynamic flow or stream of conversations. So we'll have an activity stream, as they call it, which allows for real-time updates, but threaded conversations, as well as people liking and stuff. But you can also share kinds of resources and links and files and so forth. So there's a kind of a mini storage area as well. But so you've got your major network. Whoa, what's going on there? Major network. But you can also create groups, private groups within the network. And in terms of, this is a Yammer network I've got here. You can actually have external networks as well. That means external people can actually become part of your main network without actually getting into your private network. And this means then you can set private group spaces can be set out for working areas or learning areas, and this would be the groups that you will have joined. But the good thing is they'll all be merged into one stream. So your flow of conversation will come from all your areas, from your working areas and from your learning areas. And really, this is now we're getting learning and working being integrated, because people are not seeing them as two separate items. You don't go to a learning platform perhaps for a course. Your activities, your learning activities could take place within a group here. And so some organizations are really much thinking about using these tools as a way to provide that social connectiveness within their organization. And I'll show you some examples in a minute how they're using them. But first of all, I just would ask you another question. I'm interested whether you have an enterprise social network in your organization. Not necessarily do you use it for L&D or anything, but do you know that the one exists? And if so, what's it called? Let me get the polling back up again now. And we'll go to the next poll. Okay. So I've given you a few examples, the ones I've talked about. Yammer, do you have Yammer? If you have Yammer, text that code with the number, or poll. Do you have Yive? Do you have Podio? Do you have something else? Or perhaps we don't have one, Let's just get a feel for who has got these networks in their organizations. Okay, so the ones we have, Yammer is obviously way ahead. We haven't anybody Jive. I'm surprised at that, because Jive's really becoming quite popular now. That one, Podio, is not so well known. Something else, be interested to know what those ones are, but we'll leave that to later. And don't have one. Well, as I said, you probably do have one. You just don't realize you don't have one, because most organizations do have a Yammer network. They just don't know about it. As I said, if you go to yammer.com and you type in your email address, if the one exists, you will go into it, because it's a free service. It only becomes paid for when you claim the admin rights over it. So it's likely you do have one. And if you look in there, you'll probably find people using it for different things. So I think that number may not be quite right. You probably do have one. But even if you don't, what I'm going to be talking about is maybe things that you can think about for the future when you do, or if you do, and the things you can do even if you don't have one. But bear in mind that all the while we have separate systems for learning and working, we see learning as a separate activity from working. And the future, well, as most people are recognizing, it's something that has to be well integrated, embedded, whatever word you like to use in working. It has to be something that happens in the workflow. As soon as we get asked people to step out of the workflow, they won't do it unless they have to, or they'll reject it. So that's why we're getting problems with understanding e-learning in many cases. Now, sometimes there are times when you have to do it. So don't let me say that that's a rule for everything. But in many cases, if we can get learning happening in the workflow, this works well. Okay, so let's move back to the slides now then. So how are people using these networks? Well, clearly the most important reason that they've probably been established in the first place is for work teams and groups to share their knowledge and experience with one another. So what some learning development departments do is now helping those teams, working very closely with the teams to work and learn together by sharing their knowledge and experiences in the flow of work. Now that sharing thing sounds easy, doesn't it? We've seen the people out on the social web happy to share and learn from one another. But of course, that's only one group of people, isn't it? And the other group of people is the people who have never been exposed to social web and are sharing is not something that's come naturally to them. So whereas we've got some people who are very happy to share, on the other hand, we've got other people who are not. So a lot of work, if we want these things to work together, an organization to implement them and adopt them, obviously want them to work, we need to help people to share who are not used to sharing. Now, I'm talking a bit odd there, walk there. Some people can use the others to help get that going, but a little bit of input by learning development actually does help. And it's things like helping them understand why they should be sharing. A lot of people often think that it's about knowledge is power, keeping it all to myself. I've spent 20 years in this organization learning, and why should I share it with other people? So it's about helping people understand why they should share, what they should share. Some people say, what do I do? What do I put on the network? What do I say? What? And the how. That's the technological part of it. Okay, that perhaps requires some understanding of the platform underneath, but it's not about just the technology. It's not about just training people to use the technology. And it's not about training them to be social, because I don't think you can train people to be social. You can only help them to be social, as I said earlier. And that's a big difference there. So working closely, it means actually probably getting into the teams, helping them to do that. But these knowledge sharing are the new skills of the future. You know, this is where the organizations are going to want to, their people to do this, to share for themselves, along with collaboration. Collaboration was seen to be, by senior directors, as being the most important skill in upcoming years. But again, what does it mean to collaborate? I mean, we use these words glibly, but actually to collaborate, to work productively and purposefully together, is actually requires some help with people to do that. It's not something that you just say, here's a network, go collaborate. Because in most cases, it doesn't happen. So often, when the networks are installed, people are just told to get on and do with it. But they need some support. And this is where learning development partners are really beginning to play a part in helping people do that job, do the job and learn at the same time through knowledge sharing and collaboration. But they're doing it through the modeling the new behaviors. So they're getting in there and they're helping people understand what it means to share, what it means to collaborate, why, and so forth. They're modeling the behaviors so that people can copy them. They're showing them what a post looks like, what a comment looks like. Maybe trivial things to you, but for others it's quite important to understand what that actually means in reality. So it's about modeling new behaviors rather than training or shaping new behaviors. And that is quite a difference, I think, from the work that a lot of us have done up to past, which is about information transfer, creating content, content pieces, and then delivering them to people. So it's about now actually helping them with these new skills. So I'm just wondering, another question here for you. For how many of you is building these new skills of sharing and collaboration in the digitally connected workplace high on your agenda, or has it not got there yet? Let's have a look. Let's get back to my poll here. That's the next question. So this is just a yes/no answer. Is it high on your agenda? Well, let's not put high on your agenda. Let's put it on your agenda. Let's not. Is it something that you're thinking about or you're becoming part of? Is it something that you think is going to be future and you'll need to play a part in that? Well, that's encouraging. Anyway, I was a bit worried because I know. That's good. So it's as I said, it's one of the key skills, a number of key skills. I think it's almost, we have to break them down into different skills here. It's about sharing, collaboration. It's about managing your own knowledge to bring it into the organization. So there's a lot of things there. But certainly these tools, and you can do this by getting actually into the work groups through the systems and support them. It won't just happen with you. They obviously need a supportive culture of sharing, supportive managers who value knowledge sharing as part of the process. But certainly in terms of building the skills, it's a good place for L&D to start to make a different impact in the business, one from perhaps they're used to. So it's, as I say, it's not about creating a little e-learning course on how to use Yammer. That's not going to do it. That's not going to cut the mustard. It's about getting in there and helping people to do it. So what are the ways that you can do that? Let's have a look at some of the ways that organizations are doing this and some of the different approaches that they're taking. The first one is probably fairly familiar to you, and that is that they're building learning communities. Now, that is a good start for sure. By adding a community around a learning event or activity, we'll start to, you can use that as a place to start building the connectiveness and the sharing experiences and so forth. It might be a pre-event where you want to kind of give them stuff up front and get them bonding together, or it might be something after the event to keep the conversation going. So that is a good starting place. Now let me just ask you then, how many of you are actually building learning communities? Because that has become pretty popular. Oh, what's it done to my screen now? I know, if I do escape, that seemed to work okay last time that way. Next poll. There we go. So this is just another yes-no question, really. So are you building communities? I'm not going to go too much into communities, but it's, communities of practice, learning communities are beginning to sort of happen. So that's good to hear. We're getting some communities. Now, having said that, and having said it's a good start, I should tell you some things about the sort of problems with communities, because communities are, as I say, a great place to do that. But what happens is people tend to create a community and say, right, well, I'll go in here and have a discussion. So off you go and have the discussion. And of course, nothing happens. So then they think, how are we going to make people have a discussion? Then they say, you must go in and you must put a post. And of course, what happens is then we get this false sort of interaction, people feeling they have to use it. But one of the so forcing interaction isn't the way to do things. So if you're going to have a community, you need to have a good purpose for your community. It's not going to be just set up just because it's the latest trend to do so. It's got to be, and you've got to spend time and effort in building that community and making it happen, because it won't just happen on its own. Even a few people that do share, they'll get fed up if they find that most people aren't. But not everybody will share anyway, so you've got to accept that as a fact for the time being, that it won't share. But one of the reasons why people don't actually go to communities is because they do their copies of content over here and they're learning whatever, and then they're told to go over there to the community. And even that step over there is one step too many for them. It's like saying to somebody, right, we'll sit here and you listen to me now, but before to have the discussion, you've got to go down that room and down the corridor, and we'll have the discussion down there. How many of you would actually get down there, I wonder? There'll be all kinds of things to distract you. So we might end up with a few people down there. So that's the same with communities. When you keep the content and the community separate, what happens is that people don't tend to go to communities. Only the people that do go there. They talk a bit, and then they get a bit dispirited because nothing's happening, and there's nobody coming in and supporting, encouraging, and seeding and feeding. So communities, if they're not done properly, can actually be worse than if they're done at all. So unfortunately, that is the case. So how do you solve that problem? Well, one of the things that we've been doing, Harold and I mentioned earlier, been running some workshops. What we do is we actually host a whole of the community in our social networking site, in our enterprise social networking site. We actually do it. We have our own Yammer network, which people can come to. But we also go to other people's networks, and we take up a private group or in one of theirs. And so we use this whole flow of conversations. And the whole rationale behind it is it's not about stocks, it's not about a piece of content, and then a conversation for time today. It's a whole conversation. It's about constant sharing during the time of the workshop. Now, it might be 3 or 4 weeks long, the workshop, but there's a number of key elements to it. What makes it different? Firstly, I talk about it's a scaffolded event. So we don't just provide all the content in a big package and hand it to people. It's about providing a sort of framework for the learning to take place. So you might call it a semi-structured event. So you've got a framework. So like over 4 weeks, we decide in each of the 4 weeks what we'd like to see happening. But it's very important that there's a lot of self-governance, as I call it. That's the way of saying we give people a lot of autonomy. We don't make them do things in a particular way. We don't even make them interact at all. We don't make them do anything. We offer them the opportunity to do things in ways that suit them. So the people that want to share and want to be quite sort of talk a lot, that's fine. Other people that don't want to share, we won't force them to do that. What we'll probably do is have a conversation, one-to-one conversation behind to find out what the problem is or why they don't want to share. But we won't force it. And we let them interact and do things in the way they do. So there's no prescribed way of doing things. But the focus is the social element, the focus is the conversation, and the content comes in as support rather than the other way around. And any links to content will appear in the flow, and they'll be able to get access. So they haven't got to come out, sort of move from places to places. This is where the whole thing takes place. This is the hub, and they'll just get access to content at that during the flow. And the whole thing is oriented about performance, what they can do at the end of it. So it's not about what they're going to learn particularly, but what they're going to do out of it. And I think this is another key element of these kind of systems, because I bet some of you are thinking, well, how do you manage that in your learning management system? And the answer is you don't, or you don't need to, because, believe it or not, activity doesn't equal learning. People might be active, fairly active, but doesn't necessarily mean that they're learning or they have learned. And just because people aren't active doesn't mean that they're learning, they haven't learned either. So by tracking stuff doesn't actually mean we're doing adding much value to it here. All we can know is that whether they've learned, or at least they can apply what we've said and talked about, and discussed, is if they can do something. So it's all about what can they do. So at the end of the week, it's be some sort of activity that kind of demonstrate what they can do. And then how that gets assessed, well, that depends on the type of workshop, but it could be self-evaluation. You know, I feel that I now can do this, and that's for us just as valid as anything else. Peer evaluation, so if it's a collaborative event activity, you know, how people work together, or it might be through something the manager might want to sort of evaluate it. So can that person, when they go back to the job, do something differently? So we use these kind of workshops as a way to also to try and build those skills, for instance. So that a connected worker workshop, for instance, might talk about what sharing is all about, and the psychology of sharing and how to share. So very basic stuff. And we use the same system that they're going to be doing for their real life sharing, their work sharing. And we can begin to build those skills in a sort of, as say, a semi-structured way. They need to be, you know, quite highly facilitated and driven. It's not about just setting the thing up and then just leaving it. We spend time with them. And this kind of approach, I'm beginning to see happen in organizations. Often people say, oh, you have to be very self-directed. But I think that's important because we are trying to help people become self-governing in a way, because the future is, we can't provide everything we need for everybody in L&D. All we can do is help them to do things for themselves in many ways. And we need to provide that underpinning support for that, rather than trying to think that we know best and that only what we say is the only way of doing things. Time is pressing on, so I'm going to zip through some of the other ones. Back channel learning. One of the things, quite important things, is using the back channel as part of the learning experience. So here, these are some events that I ran. Small event, a big event. In both those events, we used Twitter as our back channel. These people were using it to record their thoughts and document their thinking as we went through the workshop. No pressure on them to do it, just if you like to do it and share it, we can all benefit from it. And then this one here, which was at an e-learning network event, we actually had I scheduled some questions to come in during the time, and we actually had it open to the world, really. So just like I asked you to think about tweeting in your channel, the back channel here that we set up, then we could use that in the same way. So we've got some people here, like Niall's not here in the room for sure. And if you wanted to have a big conversation, you could use Twitter. You want to have a global conversation and get people in the back channel. Now, I just asked one question here, but it's easy to feed in lots of different questions and get people to so look, we've got loads of stuff coming in, I think. Not everybody here is in the room. So we're beginning to get a conversation going which is wider than our own little conversation here. So the back channel can have an important part to play. That's a public channel, obviously, and I guess some of you say, I can't use that in my organization. There are private back channel tools, but what a lot of people are using their social networking site like Yammer to do those private chats. And so they are building, they're holding their chats like a workshop or something, and they're saying to people, use the back channel in a group to talk about and discuss and so forth. And we've got a record there of what people are thinking about. And that was probably one of the nicest fun events I ran, because you look at this guy, you can see his face. He hadn't used Twitter before, so Sam was helping him, and there really was a social learning experience, because they were working together, talking about it. It was quite an informal experience, and they were learning from one another. I didn't do any training. I didn't say, this is how you use Twitter. They just got on with it. People just shared with one another. So it gives that extra dimension, remember. It's not the whole thing. It's an extra dimension. But it makes them helps people feel that they're part of the conversation. And I hope that you in part of it here and those of you who are not, you can go back and see the conversation that's been going on. If you can't, multitask and you want to look later, you just go back and look at the conversation that took place. So what I'm seeing here is organizations using this networking site is actually to build a constant stream, an ongoing stream of learning activities. These might be these live chats, a bit like live Twitter chats. They call them Yam Jams on Yammer, when people come together at a very specified time to answer a few questions or have a conversation. It might be like just an hour, or it might be like some organizations, like running multinational organizations, running across 24 hours or 36 hours, having ongoing conversation around the world on topics like that. But perhaps people might think are sort of not necessarily professional events, but hot seats and book clubs, and this is quite a useful one. Daily tip, you can use the network to provide a daily tip of learning every day. You could just say, right, here's something to look at. And those 10 minutes a day, remember I said, to find out something. You could, if you just drip fed something every day, this is a good idea for looking at 10 minutes a day, you can build up sort of just a general momentum of knowledge around a topic. It could be something very specialized about IT. It could be just generic, all kinds of things. And then some of the other things that it's being used for, social onboarding. Well, we call it induction, don't we? But Americans call it social onboarding. People are going to work with these tools, so start using them from day one. As soon as people come into the organization, they get to know their co-workers and the culture, and they can ask questions, and people in there, and they can access resources, and they can start that contributing and understanding the knowledge sharing and collaboration is a part of the organization's culture or new culture from the beginning. And many organizations are now using these tools as a very important way of getting people on board. So it's not just about sitting in classes and listening to the vision, mission, and whatever it is of an organization, but actually really meeting people and understanding what it's all about and asking the questions like, where's the best place to go for lunch? Because that's just as important part of working as it is finding out about the organization. And then social mentoring. A lot of mentoring is done through, organized mentoring, where you find somebody and you find somebody else and you put them together and you manage their mentoring activities. But here you can play a place that allows informal and ad hoc mentoring to take place. So people want to match one another up. They want to find a mentor, or they're happy to be a mentor for somebody. People can just come together and do that themselves. And it might be very ad hoc. It might be just for a small project or a small task or a small activity. It doesn't have to be for a long-term leadership mentoring activity. So that's beginning to happen, and it's something that can be coordinated, shall we say, by learning and development. So I was going to ask you which of those activities you think might work in your organization. So it's all right if I go on for a bit longer, isn't it? I'm going over my time, really. And I'm nearly there, I promise you. So let's just do that exercise. Which of those things I've told you that is back-channel learning, online social workshops, social onboarding? I'm afraid you can only choose one in this system. So which of those things I've told you just strikes you as the most significant way you could go back and start doing something in your organization? Even if it's not in your social network, if you haven't got one, what are those things that you think are actually might be a useful way of going forward? seems to have stopped at 20 this time. Oh, it's going on a bit further. Okay, well, that's good. A bit of a... This is interesting. This one's coming out, this ongoing stream. I thought, when I talk about this, I think people are not going to be so interested in that one, because that means doing something, you know, different and extra than from the normal events. But those are really good ways of bringing people together and bringing those connections and helping people connect from across departments and coming together for just almost not necessarily work-related learning activities, but just general building that sort of spirit of sharing and collaborative culture in the organization. So that actually does an awful lot. It might seem like the most trivial, but it actually can have the most impact. So thanks for doing that. Just in summary then, and hopefully to bring together everything I've said, I was recently asked to what the significant trends in workplace learning over the last 15 years, over the last 5 years. And when I started to think about it, I came up with this graphic of a comet going through the sky. So I started to plot on it sort of trends as I saw them, because I've been in the business so long, I've seen everything now. I think the first trend was pretty much us automating training, so turning it into e-learning and setting up learning management systems. That was, happening. I was doing that back in '97, but over the last 10 years, probably, we focused a lot on enhancing e-learning in some ways, adding to it, blending it, gamifying it, mobilizing it, or whatever. But I think, as I tried to show you at the very beginning, it's sort of the social areas of changing things. Our ability to go and use the web, which is changing the way we are learning individually, and that this now is having an impact on the way workplace learning is changing. It's moving to a performance consulting approach, which is looking at how we can improve performance, understanding the value of professional networks, but essentially about knowledge sharing and collaboration. For me, this is where the sort of like the Comet trailblazing organizations are now going. They're still going to do some of this. Don't let you believe that that's all forgotten. But we're now thinking we need to broaden the scope of learning, workplace learning. And then I did another graphic, which I tried to plot onto it some of the tools from the top 100 tools. And it looks like that. It's a bit of a massive thing. The blue ones are sort of the enterprise commercial tools, and you can see that they really are very dominant in those early days of e-learning and so forth. But it's in this period of informal and social learning where we're all going out and searching and using Facebook and so forth, and using lots of tools to manage our own learning. That's what personal knowledge management is there, Evernote and so forth, and curation tools and so forth. And that really is influencing the way that some of the tools are being used now. And tools like collaboration tools, enterprise collaboration tools, Yammer and Google Apps and even SharePoint are becoming important, because these are ways that we can start to support that more informal social learning that's been happening for some time now. So social learning for me then isn't about just adding social media to the e-learning bit. It's about understanding how we can help organizations learn, or individuals in those organizations learn from one another. And in fact, enterprise social networks are actually one way that this is happening. They're no longer separate activities. We're now seeing them in an integrated way. And I think it's always been our aim to sort of integrate or embed learning in the workflow. And I think now these tools can actually help that to happen. And we can see that those 5 elements I showed you earlier, how people are learning on the social web, almost can be applied now to workplace learning if we kind of see the bigger picture. So I've run over time a bit, I'm sorry about that. I'll just say that if you're interested in reading any more about what I've said, because everything I've said today you can read some form or other. If you go to the website c4lpt.co.uk, you can find some white papers I've written. There's one on the workplace learning revolution. There's one on enterprise learning networks, as I call them, or enterprise social networks. There's some of the recent presentations I've given, and I'll put this presentation on SlideShare, which will be available through the website as well. And if you want to look at some of the sort of work that we do in supporting organizations, then that's the place to go as well. So thank you for listening. I hope it's made help you think a little bit differently about what social learning can mean to your organization. Thank you. Well, I think in secure environments, you have to have something private, don't you? So you need to make sure you have a private forum or a private discussion space, and either your internal systems or something that you can ensure. A lot of the public sites allow you to have private, secure items. And did you say you're in the NHS? No, just in higher education. Because, obviously in certain areas you have to be very careful. But the technology apart, I think the most important thing is to plan it well. Too many people, as I said, still think, let's add a community on, and don't think it through further than that. What's it going to do? What's the purpose of it? Who's going to be there to support it? How much time can they use to support it? What's their place in it going to be? Is it something just to get things started and then let the other people take over? Is it going to have a lifetime, or is it just going to go drag on? And how are we going to define success? What's it all about, really? So really some very key points up front to thinking about it before you even get started. And then ensuring that that person who's going to support it really knows what they're doing. Often I hear about people want to set one up, but they haven't had any experience. They've never had any experience of actually participating in a workshop. So they don't really understand what it means to be lead a community. So instead, if you don't get those stuff right up front, you can fail at the first hurdle, because quite clearly people can put in something like this. What do you think of this? And then they go away and nothing happens. And so it takes time. And anything that I build, I don't let it be an empty place to start with. It's going to have stuff in it. I make sure that we've got a number of people talking about things first. So there's always some content in there to get people thinking. And there's also some way that they can see what it means to comment, what it means to post, so how the group works as a whole. Because, as I said, some of those very basic things about what does a comment look like, what does a post look like, need to be supported. And you don't go around training people to do it. Your post must have 20 words in it or something like that. It's about helping them see. If they see something, they'll just copy it. And copying is probably the best way of doing that. So good planning. If it's a major thing, a good launch. And there's some fabulous videos of ways people have launched communities. They do the Yama launch. They did a big song and dance act, and there's a big video about that. So they got a big buzz. But of course, after that big flush of enthusiasm, back to earth, you've got to maintain it. So you've got to seed it and constantly keep it going and refreshing it all the time. And that takes time until it begins to build momentum and people can then start doing it for themselves. But then you've got to think about when's the time to end it as well. That people think it's going to go on forever, and they won't. They do have a lifespan, and you've got to know when that life is finished. When is it time to say, let's close it down, we'll start something else? People think it's a failure when you have to close a community. That isn't, because you've learnt an awful lot, and it's better to close it before it sort of like dwindles away, and then perhaps start something else up, or if it's a sort of community practice, if it's a learning community, maybe another community, something else. Learn from what you've done in that previous community and start building another one with that experience in mind, because every organisation is different, the people in every organisation are different, they all work in different ways. So you just learn from experiences, I think. So plan well, make sure you've got somebody who's going to spend some time getting to go. Think about your exit strategy as well.
I think we do have time for a couple more questions if anyone's got anything they'd like to ask either Jane or Matt and I from Relearning.
So just general questions really on...
General questions, on topic, at least on learning would be great. Does anyone have anything they'd like to ask or hear us waffle on?
One of the questions I always think what questions might come up, and from the questions I've had before, and one of the questions people say is, well, we do have an enterprise social network, but it's not being used, and it's a lot of tumbleweed running through it. I mean, this is an analogy they normally say. And I say, well, this is a good opportunity for learning and development to go in and clear out that tumbleweed and get it working, because I think you're in a prime position to start really supporting that. And the good thing about it for me is some of those things is you can actually bring external providers in to start offering their own programs and workshops right within your network. So it's not, a step away out into another system. They can actually become part of it. And learning development departments, where I've seen it around the world happening, and they've taken kind of like control of it in some ways. I'm saying control in the way that's sort of helping it to happen, and really making a significant impact on the business. And the whole role as being perceived very, very differently in the organization as something that's underpinning work, business, and performance improvement, not just about creating training courses. And I think that, some of the really good stuff that's happening with these with organizations are thinking like that. Now, I'm obviously here with relearning, so I'm not aware of saying that training is going to be diminished, go away forever. There's always going to be a need for training, but this is a new area and a burgeoning, will become, I believe, a burgeoning area from my experience of what's happening. There's two things I'll say to that. The first thing is you can't change a culture overnight, for sure. And I think somebody put it very well, you can only change the culture one conversation at a time. I think that's a really nice way of putting it, because it's one step at a time. Let's move the conversation on and help people moving on. Now, that's the easy answer, but the real practical answer to this, and that organizations are doing it, is something called reverse mentoring. Have you heard of that? Reverse mentoring is where you have an older, I'm going to be a bit ageist here, an older, more experienced member of staff and a younger member of staff. And what they do is they help one another. So the older individual starts to provide support with the business and whatever their area of expertise would be. And the reverse side is that the younger person helps them understand the value of social media and networking and sharing and all that kind of stuff and how it can impact on that. And reverse mentoring is becoming quite a significant way people are doing that. Now, again, you could do it through a coordinated program, or you could do it through some sort of social reverse mentoring. So, get people to come together and help one another. But that actually is a significant way to bring the two together and share, sort of reciprocal sharing agreement. And by doing that, by sharing, we're actually beginning to the culture of sharing now.
And I think the key to underpinning that is actually taking that marketing communication out to the business and promoting the success stories when you do get buy-in from both sides. And actually, it's the subliminal messaging that you can start to introduce across the organisation to actually promote the fact that the culture associated with learning is beginning to change internally at the organisation. I think there's other methods that you can look to introducing some of the more traditional footprints that you'll all know and utilise within your organisations, and use those as forums to promote the fact that you're changing the way in which learning can be delivered internally, by linking into some of those ideas and concepts that Jane spoke about today. And I think even at Reed as an organisation, we've begun to do that. So the concept of developing communities of practice, directing people to our Facebook and LinkedIn pages to actually continue the learning journey after they leave the training room, after they've completed an e-learning module. That's the way in which we're beginning to incorporate some of these methods that you've heard of today into more of a solution effect. And like we've said, to continue that learning journey for a much longer period of time.
And I think also just to add a final thought to that, I think the skills of the Learning and Development Department have also been shifting as much as the tools have. And we spent a long time getting people to call us the Learning Department rather than the Training Department, and that's for a good reason. I think we started to recognise that's more what we need to do. The skills that we're going to need to move into this new world, if it is indeed a new world, are going to be slightly different. This problem of having people with knowledge but reluctance to share it, and people with not exactly the same amount of knowledge but with a greater appetite for sharing or greater familiarity with the tools, aren't going to find each other by themselves. So added to the tools that we already have, and add to some of you already will be doing this already, it's about networking within your organisation and making sure that you know where the knowledge is, how valuable that knowledge is to the rest of the business, and how to connect people who have it with the people who need it. And so the tools that we've talked about today, it's not about necessarily doing new things with all of these tools. Some of it is enabling ways of doing things we've always tried to do but struggled with. We know we're not the experts at everything, and in fact that's probably why a lot of you are here today, to hear about expertise from other areas. And that's the same in your business as well. So bringing people together, using some of these online tools closes distance, makes conversations happen, and gets that knowledge moving in the direction you want it to go, which is frankly out of one person's head and into something that's capturable, maybe measurable, maybe not, doesn't really matter, but certainly accessible to a much wider audience. And so I think the first task that we all have is know where the knowledge is. And then these tools will be useful for you in sharing it around.
You're right, I didn't mention LinkedIn. Actually, it came in about 12th on the list, so that's why I mentioned it. But you're absolutely right. I think as a professional networking, that's probably what most people use as their go-to place. It's a very safe sort of networking environment, groups, as you say. I think for anybody in employment, having a resume or a CV on there, I even talk American now, I notice, CV on the website, on LinkedIn is essential. Keeping it up to date, using it as a promotional self-branding exercise is important, as well as having those connections and networks and groups and stuff in there as well. There was lots of places to go. I mean, that's not actually happens to be my go-to place, but what suits me doesn't suit everybody else. Everybody needs to find what's the best place for them, and certainly, absolutely, LinkedIn is a great place to start that professional networking activity, for sure. Thanks. Yeah, I think that is for most organisations to go for LinkedIn because it's seen as a professional network, whereas something like Facebook is often considered trivial. But there are a lot of people doing a lot of good stuff on Facebook, and what they'll do is, probably in relation to this question, I don't know if that was somebody in the room that wrote this question or not, how do you get suspicious IT departments to implement it? Well, if you can't, most people just avoid them altogether and go off and do their own things, often using Facebook because it's an easy place to do it. So many work-based groups are happening on places like that because IT departments are not playing ball, shall we say. Now, if you've got an IT department like that, best get them to talk to other organisations who are doing it and see how they've overcome the problems. Because, and I know for something like Yammer spends a lot of that time helping and supporting groups understand how secure their network is and so forth. So they recognise that is a big issue for organisations. So they don't treat it trivially. They do actually spend quite a lot of time supporting those organisations. I think maybe IT departments think that, that they're losing control of the whole thing. And, well, I'm afraid that is life. That things are moving that way. We're all losing, L&D's losing control of learning, as we've seen. So we've got to recognise that and see what we need to sort of support and manage and so forth. But all the whilst that happens, people will circumvent it and go and do their own thing. So actually, it's best to get IT on board if you can. And it shouldn't really be your job to have to do it, but often it is, isn't it? Getting IT working with you on a project and stuff. But I found some places where I've worked with organisations, the IT department's actually quite happy for us to sort of support something outside the organisation. Because I think, we haven't got to worry about that one as well. We haven't got to worry about supporting that one. So in some ways, if you can show that something is being supported and people aren't going to keep running to them for help, then they're not unhappy. So there's a couple of different ways you can either get them on board or you can go around them or work with them or whatever it is. I think you know your IT department better than anyone else. So, but it might be actually, as you said, create LinkedIn groups or even Facebook groups. So that might be an interim solution. And everything's moving anyway. So somebody said, we can't let people manage their own learning. How do we know they're learning the right thing? And I was quite sort of taken back, but over years I can understand where it's coming from, but we can't control everybody's learning. People are doing this stuff themselves. And why would they want to learn something that's not right? So if we go out, you've got a problem with Excel, you go out and you find a solution on YouTube and you solve your problem, well, you've learned the right thing, haven't you? I mean, there are probably different ways of solving that problem, but as long as you've solved the problem and you've got on with your job, that's the key thing. So it's not about controlling the message, controlling everything. There may be some things you have to sort of provide a definitive message for sure, regulatory and stuff. But a lot of stuff, it's about supporting people doing that in so many ways. And if you don't, people just will move around. And as more people realise and recognise that they've got access to their problems and their learning on their phones or whatever it is, they don't actually need to go through IT departments anymore. They can easily circumvent their IT departments because they can just do it straight on their iPads or their iPhones, and they are. So we just got to recognise that this is something we need to sort of deal with in a different way. Do you have any thoughts on that, IT departments?
Absolutely. I was just going to reiterate that point. I mean, if you look at the statistics for bring your own devices into the workplace now, the fact that the technology we have in the palm of our hands enables us to go outside of the IT infrastructure and actually go and capture the information that we want to learn in that just-in-time approach means that IT departments, there's an increasing pressure for them to be responsive because there's a governance piece that they can't control if we're doing it on our own devices. Not that I'd be promoting that, but I think that's reality for organisations in this day and age with the rise in smartphones and tablet devices.
Yeah, and I think also as well, just coming back to what it means for us in the room, if there's a conversation going on that is off message and that's a problem, be part of the conversation, influence the way that the debate is shaping and make sure that the right message is getting out there. Don't stand back and complain that the people with the knowledge aren't saying it in the way you wanted to or to the people you wanted to say it to. If you need to be on message, but participate. Join in the conversation and be there where it's happening. Don't wait and try and mop up the pieces afterwards or schedule a training course for the people who are on Twitter having a proper conversation. But I think it's about influencing, knowing what's going on and making sure that if you need to engineer it, move it in the direction you want it to go to. It might be different to what we normally do, but in many ways it's actually just quite the same. We're trying to make change happen.
Good point. Well,
I think we
come to the end.
If there are no final questions, I think we've got plenty of conversation that we can continue having. I think there may still be a couple of bits to nibble and sip before you make your way. And the hashtag will be there forever, so continue the conversation and mingle amongst yourselves, share business cards and Twitter addresses and things like that. It's been an honour having Jane with us this morning, so perhaps one final round of applause for Jane. And on behalf of everyone at Read Learning, thank you very much for coming. I hope to have a chat with you in a few seconds. Thank you.
Thank you.